Hello, everybody. So I think we're going to get started. It's already 11:30, so we'll get started so we can have some good discussions. So the format of this panel is going to be two 15-minute presentations, and then we'll do a discussion, a 30-minute discussion at the end. And it'll be completely open. So Ryan will be doing the facilitation for the 30-minute discussion. So he'll have the mic walking around and so on as he's basically posing the questions and so on. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to try to understand a little bit who the audience is, who you guys are. So we're going to have a few questions for that. So just with hands up, just to answer. The first question is, who has a mobile app right now for your organization? So there's about 4. There you go. 4 or 5. So who has actually working on digital, like a mobile strategy right now, or has a mobile strategy in place? 1, 2,
And I guess
3.
it's worth mentioning that your mobile strategy doesn't need to be exclusive to app being the endpoint. Just have a mindset and a philosophy around how your visitors before, during, and after use your website or your app.
So is that 3, 4?
Okay.
5? 5, that's good. Okay, and who has actually internal resources to develop an app? So 1, 2. Okay. I didn't expect that much. Okay. So and then who actually deployed an AR experience? Not necessarily mobile, but an AR experience, an augmented reality experience. So 2, 3. Okay. And last question, who actually got into 3D scanning of artifacts? All right. Oh,
wow.
Great. That's awesome. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's great. Okay, so we're going to get started. So I'm going to give the mic to Brandon. He's going to do his little 15-minute presentation, and then I'll do mine after.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Hope everybody's having an amazing time in San Diego. My name is Brendan Cieco. I'm the founder and CEO of QZAM. Let's get this show on the road and make sure that the presentation is actually pulling in. There we go. What we're going to talk about today is specifically, how mobile apps and mobile engagement has evolved over the last 10 or some odd years. Right now we're at a really interesting pivot point, as you've seen over the last day or so with the conversations about emerging technology. Do we do an app? Do we not? What's the ROI? Are we living in a mobile browser-based world? I know you guys are probably going to talk about progressive web apps. What do we make of this all? But one of the other elements that's playing an incredible role in that decision-making process right now is the progress that's been made in the area of augmented reality. So for today, just to kind of paint a little bit of a picture about what my team's been working on for the last several years. I mean, we basically wanted to build a platform that helped museums and cultural nonprofits engage their visitors on site quickly, easily, and affordably. And so we've had the opportunity to work with several hundred organizations, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. The things that I'm going to talk about today are going to be specific to things that have differentiated a traditional mobile app, an audio guide 2.0, with things that have a couple extra utilities for the visitor. Or not a utility at all, maybe something that created a completely new form of artistic creation at a contemporary art museum. So going to take you down the road of AR, very high level. Raise your hand if you've experienced AR. I imagine many of us in this room have. Raise your hand if you're thinking about AR or what a strategy might look like at your institution. So it's very clear today that VR may be a couple years down the road, but AR has dramatically changed the way we think about content consumption and a world where there's no limits on the imagination for what you could create, because you can create just about anything in an AR environment. So kind of the number one thing at the core of it all is, of course, it has to be, or typically is going to be tied to some educational goals that the organization has and aligning with those goals and missions. So we've all probably seen examples, been around for quite some time, about the simple notion of, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could overlay hotspots on an image, a painting in the gallery, to allow those deeper layers of the work to come to life, or have something beyond the traditional object label. So you've seen those, at the Cantor in Stanford. You've seen those maybe at Cleveland, a number of other organizations. And that was kind of like the phase one around the educational component. And then looking to, the Art Gallery of Ontario and a bunch of other organizations, there was always this notion of AR kind of first on the scene, very much around entertainment and gaming mechanics. How do we engage, how do we kind of inject some of that energy into the works? So very much the notion of edutainment. How do we bring the 17th century portrait to life in a way that makes it more relevant today? So, see a lot of examples like that. But underlying it all, like, what are the problems that we're feeling today around things like guiding people through the venue, through the labyrinth? What are those specific utilities? So also this opportunity to use these new tools to guide the visitor. And so throughout the examples that I'll go over, we're going to talk about artistic creation. We're going to talk about art restitution of works that were lost and stolen. We're going to talk about old art brought to life in a new dimension, and we're going to talk about that wayfinding utility. So to this first example, we had the great opportunity of working with the Perez Art Museum down in Miami several years ago on what became the first instance of AR kit in the museum context and one of the first solely AR-based museum exhibitions. There's no physical work whatsoever, completely reliant on this technology. And rather than look at how AR can augment or remix existing content, we kind of looked at how AR could be used as a completely new medium. So you can only imagine for a contemporary art museum that's commissioning artists to do new works, kind of what that might look like. So a project was launched about 3 years ago, PAM AR, an exhibition called Invasive Species with an artist who is looking at elements of climate change on the Miami landscape. And so she created these works that defied scale and economies, meaning that this is a digital sculpture that would be nearly impossible for an emerging contemporary artist to create, nor for any museum to fund. And so to have these works, this mezbug invading the space, taking over the space and interacting was the intent of the artist, but also to create an iterative art form. So based on the user's interactions with the work over time, seeing how people reacted or lack thereof to different colors and textures, the artist's work was evolving from day one to completion. And so this became a little bit of a press sensation for the museum. I distinctly remember my first MCN in Denver, Max Anderson standing up and saying, "You come to me talking about tech and my ears turn off. You come to me talking about attendance and buzz, I'm listening." So the very notion that for the museum, it brought together a lot of energies across the various departments was one thing. Camaraderie between the IT staff, the education staff, and the curators, that's hard to achieve, and this project did a good job in kind of fusing those interests. And it was written about pretty internationally per its merits as an artwork, per its merits in the Apple fan community, but just as like a cultural piece that took on kind of a life of its own. It's been evolving from what started at PAM to the Deering Estate, another cultural institution. They're going to be announcing a work at the Miami International Airport in the upcoming weeks. So something that started at the museum has taken on an exciting life of its own, but it would not have been possible without this team here. There are 2 people from this group that are actually here at MCN. So if you see anybody from Perez, talk to them about invasive species. There's a really exciting journey. Now kind of flipping the page to old culture, historical culture, given a completely new context. This is the artist Gustav Klimt, a native of Vienna, Austria, and on the 100-year anniversary of the death of some of the great Viennese modernists, Vienna and Austria at large were honoring Gustav Klimt, Otto Wagner, and Egon Schiele, and there's a major technology conference that's hosted in Vienna every year called Pioneers, and it takes place at the Imperial Palace, the Hofburg, and they wanted a way to infuse culture into that audience, and also the Museum of Applied Art in Vienna wanted a way to engage this tech-savvy digital contingent that was coming to their city for a couple years to talk about the future. And so there's this famous work called the Tree of Life that exists in their collection, and it's behind this glass vitrine, and they wanted to find a way to give it some new dimensions. So in collaboration with the Museum of Applied Arts and the Pioneers Festival, we enabled visitors of tourists to Vienna and visitors and attendees of this conference to plant the Tree of Life throughout the various parks and gardens of the city of Vienna. So taking something that, two-dimensional and bringing it to life. And I do want to say, and I know sometimes there's some opaqueness, sometimes there's limited transparency. This didn't cost a lot of money. I think it was four figures. It was not a 5 or 6 figure project. It was very, very straightforward, and kind of a testament to anyone scanning their collection. Once you have the scan, this obviously is created from scratch, but for your existing culture that exists in 3D, to get it into the AR environment is pretty straightforward. What I'm about to talk about next was a completely independent experimental project by various members of my team. This woman up here is Isabella Stewart Gardner, a great pioneering art collector and kind of culture vulture from my city of Boston. She amassed a remarkable collection and built a kind of a Venetian palazzo-style estate in the Fenway neighborhood of Boston to house her collection. But unfortunately, about 30 years ago, 2 men dressed up like police officers on St. Patrick's Day broke into the museum and over the course of 81 minutes stole 13 works with an aggregate value of over $500 million. They still don't know who the works are. The FBI's involved. It's kind of one of those, you're waiting for Mark Wahlberg to make a movie or Ben Affleck to make a movie about this cold case. But it's something that we know, is kind of it's something that we know in Boston, but we don't know what the works look like. We don't know if there was a heist, meaning that when you listen to people as they walk through, there are all of these, ambiguities. And so members of my team, really inspired by the museum, having grown up in the area and gone, had this idea when some of the new, advances were taking place in AR around answering the question, could we put the stolen art back in the frames at the Gardner Museum? Is it technically possible? What are the dynamics there? And will it look good? Is it stable? Like all of those underlying technical questions. And so kind of lo and behold, this is absolutely, a simplistic skunkworks 3 or 4 hours of developer time just experimenting in a new medium to see, is this possible? And, are there people that are, further driven to the works that didn't know what they looked like or didn't know what they felt like, or just the missing context when you're looking at a JPEG, on a website or in a printed book. It's a whole other thing to return the culture to its rightful context or place. So again, completely experimental, independent from the museum, just something a bunch of nerds in Boston were intrigued by. It kind of took on a life of its own in the eyes of the media, with coverage in Wired and Vice and Fast Company. The art world responded. A lot of articles in Russia and China, much to our surprise. If anybody has any tips about where the works might be, I don't know, maybe correlation, I don't know. But it just really was intriguing to see what the reaction to such a simple experiment, might look like. And I think, more than anything, like the idea of just simple experiments might take on a life of their own, and in the process you learn a lot. So some of the discussions were more interesting than the even experience or the output. Like all of these articles started to come out at the end of last year, as the restitution debate rages on in Europe. Does the solution lie in the art of the high-tech copy? And below that headline was the screenshot from Hacking the Heist, the Isabella Stewart Gardner overlaid AR project. And then in another article about the same topic, should we relinquish our insistence on privilege of owning original works in favor of technological wizardry? I think one was ArtNet and the other one was the Art Newspaper. So this idea of these questions about provenance and rightful place of these artifacts, does AR and VR play a role? And I think the simple answer is yes, it does. And then right after the tragic destruction of the National Museum in Rio de Janeiro, a PhD student wrote a piece about hacking the heist, hacking the inferno. What do you do when your art is lost in a fire? Pointing to that project. So we were just kind of like completely blown away and surprised that this took on a life of its own. And then folks from this community, like Loic Talon, the former chief digital officer, said if someone's making an AR experience out of the collection, I see that as pure mission fulfillment. So what does it mean when your team creates an AR experience, or a third party creates an AR experience, or people are catching Pokemon at your organization? Those are all 3 very different things, but if it's involving your collection or your story, that's surely a positive. And just to cite, and quote Max Anderson again, like, a boon for institutions. So these things can really kind of catapult forward, especially as the consumer, experience evolves and the expectation for experience evolves. And so when this article came out, and probably a lot of you in this room read it, the New Yorker did a piece, or rather Malik, one of the founding fathers of the internet blog, and a prominent venture capitalist, wrote a piece in the New Yorker that every single friend, family, relative was forwarding me, because kind of deep down into the article about Pokemon Go, he talks about going to the newly renovated SF MoMA, and he said, I wanted to know everything about the art, and I felt as if I should be able to lift up my phone and get more details rather than having to type a search term in my browser. So very simplistic, basic idea of something someone wanted to achieve. And so the thing that really stood out for me was when he wrote, Pokemon Go had changed my expectations on how to access information. It's not about Pokemon Go. It's not about catching Pokemon. It's the shift in expectation. And so I think what we're always up against, regardless of how we feel people should access content or what type of medium they should be using or what to use or what not to use, is that kind of doesn't matter, because we're not our target audience. It's what the consumer expectation is. So when I can order a car in a tap of my phone, or order a pizza tap of my phone, or whatever, transfer funds through Venmo, like that to the consumer is frictionless. And so when they experience these things, they want to see that in the world around them. And so I thought Malik did a really interesting job of applying that. And so it really, obviously with the work that we do with museums and kind of looking at notions of accessibility and ease of use, we wanted to see, can we easily identify every single work in a gallery using the new treasures of machine vision? Is it good enough? Is it spatially competent enough to overlay this information and kind of remove layers of fiction? So a lot of these things are general experiments. We're intrigued by what some of these tools are capable of doing. But beyond that, we wanted to kind of gut check and see, are any of these things actually useful? We think they're cool, but we're too close. What do people think about it? And so we ran a survey at a major institution in the Northeast with over 120 subjects. And it was overwhelmingly positive when you handed someone a device with no interface. All it said was, hold me up to a painting and I'll tell you more. Just that sheer simplicity. And we only have a couple more minutes here, but some concepts that I want to leave you with as thinking about kind of where things are going, where you guys are going to kill me, but skating to where the puck is going, to my great Canadians to my left. So kind of like pretty much the whole game. So there's this
player in a past.
Yeah. So there's this kind of this concept, people saying that we're going from web platform number 1, social media platform number 2, platform number 3 being this concept of mirror world, where the physical world and the digital world are being kind of, the lines between them are blurred. And the reality is that Google and Apple and tech companies are creating a virtual digital carbon copy of the physical world. Museums do have a great opportunity to play, in that sandbox in a really positive way, and it has great implications beyond, connecting the two, but also in the area of wayfinding, which is just a huge, huge challenge. Over the last, 5 years I've been here, I've heard talks on Blue Dot, you are Blue Dot, you're not Blue Dot, beacons, don't use them, they're great, everything in between. And the reality is that wayfinding is so difficult, and the infrastructure needed to achieve any level of accuracy is really painful. So we were doing some experimentation around this idea of the converging the two views. It's not about Blue Dot. It's not about kind of zooming out to where I am over a floor plan with limited context around it. But I just put this slide up here because when you put a Harvard Business Review slide, people think you're wicked smart, and I'm from Boston, so that's really the reason. No, it's a great article on the Harvard Business Review. I think it was like co-written by someone from PTC, which is one of the leaders in AR and VR and CAD software, just around that idea of the convergent view as taking away the mental effort. And I know we even look as like 2 taps as being, hey, that's not a lot of mental effort, or 3 taps, but really just no effort whatsoever. So that idea. And so put together, some ideas about the matter, and kind of what it came to the head at was that AR is going to kill the blue dot. It's going to kill the blue dot as we have these convergent views. So one of the utilities that we've been doing a lot of work in is like the simple notion of hey, if I know what the work, I'm speaking from the behalf of a phone, hey, if I know what the work looks like, I can probably put down this line that gives someone a path from point A to point B, and then I can congratulate them with some really exciting content when they get there, and it might be available in the language that they speak. They might be able to change the size, might be available in a way where someone who has low or no vision has the ability to get audible directions from point A to point B. So these are just some of the concepts that we've been working deeply in over the last couple of years. And for me, it all kind of wraps up. And if we think of the world as a book, then AR has this opportunity of being this digital magnifying glass. So really pulling back the onion, letting people, touch any specific layer they want to and experience the content with as limited number of obstacles as possible. So that's my spiel. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing my hockey-playing friends to my left talk about where the puck is going, skating to where the puck is going.
In the goal.
In the goal.
In the goal.
Put the biscuit in the basket, as they say.
I'm just going to grab your stuff here.
Yeah.
Grab this.
Yep.
All right, so my talk is going to be about what we do at the Canadian Museum of History and Canadian War Museum, and what we've started looking at in terms of a strategy for mobile and where to go next. So we're looking at a mobile museum guide as a framework at this point. So just to give a bit of context of who we are, so we're basically in Ottawa, and so two provinces, Gatineau and Ontario. So two museums, one on just on the other side of the Gatineau part, and then the other one, so it's a 20-minute walk between the two. So it's two buildings. So one building, the Canadian Museum of History, we have about 1 million square foot, 3 million artifacts, 1.3 million visitors a year for the History Museum. The War Museum, we have 400,000 square foot, 500,000 artifacts, and 500,000 visitors a year as well. So having two physical buildings, having a museum guide is a challenge. Try to maintain. And so what we looked at is we started looking at the entire visitor journey of our visitors, and start looking at what the pain points, of course, are, and how a mobile guide can actually help through the visitor journey and enhance that experience overall. So that was the root of some of our digital strategies. So what we did is we started looking at drafting, so it's in progress, drafting our full strategy for mobile with these principles. So inclusive, of course, engaging, playful, flexible, simple, and sustainable. Okay. And of course, looking at the whole pan of different solutions that are out there, open source solutions and other solutions that are available through vendors and third parties. What we started looking at is actually developing a new platform, is what we decided on going, on an open source platform. And of course, looking at the different main features that most museums do. And by developing this platform, we're making it, of course, completely modular and available for both of our museum as well, because it has to be all themed and directed, right? So, of course, we're looking at the different main focus features, profiles. I'll talk a little bit about that. What's happening at the museum today. So as they're landing on the museum, downloading the app, opening the app, what's going on, what's happening. And then, of course, the exploring, which is a big beast on its own. How do you explore the museum? And then just that wayfinding, like how to direct myself around the museum. So those are the main 4 features that we selected to try to deep down. And we're talking about foundations here. So we're talking about developing some foundation features so that we can build upon that afterwards and so on. So these are the 4 foundations that we went in. We're actually talking a little bit more in terms of, this is a new, we haven't seen much of this yet, so we're looking at developing a fully customized experience for the visitor. And we're looking at different languages. So of course, being in Canada, we have 2 official languages, but also we're actually opening up. So our current app, we have now, our temporary, is in 7 languages for the tourism market, right? So the language, so you select your language, you select your age group, and we'll talk about that as well, what that relates to and what it affects. The audience group, so are you an explorer, are you an educator? So it actually will fluctuate the type of experience that you're getting. Your interest, are you you're interested in for example, art, for Canadian history, so it focuses a bit of the content that will be displayed, and then your membership status, so there's some added value of what's happening, so as you're exploring with the mobile guide, it provides you those benefits. And of course, special needs and accessibility, all right? So transforming the mobile guide into an audio guide for the experience is for visually impaired and other type of special needs as well, even autism and some other type of special needs, to craft that experience that you're going through the museum. Of course, the notification and privacy and so on settings are there as well. So if we go more into the customization. So once a visitor actually customizes their needs, then it's their home, the main page of what's going on is completely crafted based on those settings. If I selected, for example, the age group, if I'm actually in the more child under 12 or even under 8, it becomes more of a did you know or a scavenger hunt, but it's the same content that's crafted based on the age group and so on and so on. So now you're talking about the exploratory content, and it's fully customized to your needs. You even have different ways to explore based on not your languages, your interest group, and so on, and what's tailored in terms of what's happening, the public programming and so on displays there for your needs. So as we're getting into explore, it goes even more into customization. So as a child, for example, like I was saying, you're looking at exploring the galleries in more of a playful kind of way, or a very did you know kind of small tidbits of content. And if it's based on interest as well, so you can tell that you can craft these experiences based on what you want. And one of the important ones, of course, is based on your time that you have allowed as well. So someone going to the museum, we have about, you would have to sleep there for a week to actually go through all the content we have in our galleries. So it's impossible, right? So you only have, your family of 4, you only have about an hour, okay? So this tool will actually give you the tool of getting to the things that you need to see in that hour based on what your goals are of what you're getting. So it's a bit of goal setting with your profile. So that was one of our base foundation that we want to start building up for this customization of these tours. And of course, the actual tours, so as you're getting into the galleries, there are some added value, and we'll go a little bit through that. An infrastructure is necessary to be able to provide a really good interactive tour. So of course, we're looking at some triggers. So we're looking at 3 different types of triggers. All 3 of them would be deployed. You've got those, the plates, so this is a point of interest. So you can actually put in a code saying, okay, there's something here on our mobile guide that is of interest, so an added value or so on. Put the code in and you'll get the content that you need, the additional content. Of course, it has all the braille and so on. The NFC tag is actually right underneath the label. So you can actually just tap your phone instead of putting the code. So if for mobile devices that have that enabled, so you can just tap the phone and it'll just give you that additional content. The beacon is there as well. There's a feature of saying, well, what's near me? I'm just browsing. So what's near me? So you're clicking on the near me, and it shows you some of the interesting and added value content that's in and around you. So that infrastructure is important just to kind of build up the foundation of all the possibilities that we could do that you saw that Brandon was speaking about as well. So that's the infrastructure part. In the So of course, as you explore some of the foundation, and these are all different modules that we were developing, so they can be added on or added off depending on the museums that we manage. So of course, the augmented reality object, so having to scan, and this is a basic foundation for augmented reality where you can have artifacts that are 3D scanned, and they're behind the glass, so you're not able to actually touch it. So you can just pop it up on the screen, rotate it, look underneath it, and also access some hot points content to be able. So this is just a foundation augmented reality feature for the app that we're looking at, and this is something that could be integrated and just grown through the exhibition. And I was asking the question about 3D scanning. The technology is here today. The 3D scanning that we've been demoing, the actual hardware hasn't really evolved too much, but it's the software that has evolved 500 times for the last few years. It would take to do, for example, the skull that's there, even in full color, so that little blue scanner are you familiar? Any of you familiar with these two scanners? No? So this is I'm not doing a sales pitch or anything, but it's the demo. That's the scanners that we actually selected as we did our research. The little blue scanner is actually a scanner that will do high definition, full color. And within 15 minutes, you're able to have a 3D scan of your object with the software that's attached. A student can actually, with the proper quick training, could actually get this done. So this is an affordable way to get 3D scans within 15 minutes or so, and it's quite interesting. The little gray one is for larger objects, so it's a little less detailed. But it's for larger objects like canoes and things like that. What they've, in the demo, what they've done is you use the combination of both, so you can do the large canoe, and then you go back into with a small one for little details and so on. And then the software will actually very easily, within 30 minutes or so, you can actually get a full, well-designed 3D canoe. So for augmented reality, those are the foundations that we're setting up right now in our strategy. We're getting that in place for us to start getting that augmented reality approach through galleries as you're walking around. And for the visitor at home, our strategy is to provide these 360 virtual tours. So again, it's the little 360s of different galleries or highlights of galleries throughout the museums, and then in there you have little hot points and things, of course, of just a little deep dive of certain elements. But again, it's from home, right? So Google Cardboard, affordable. You just put it on there and you can explore it. Our current app actually has just 360s with no little hot points, but you get a really good immersive experience of knowing what's going on, how the museum experience would feel when you're there. So those are the foundation for exploring. And then you got a bit of the wayfinding necessary. Here, I'm here, and so on. So it's the traditional map wayfinding with the blue dot, as Brendan was saying. So there is a blue dot of saying where you are, interactive as well of saying where the interesting points are, and so on, based on your settings and your profile that you've set. So it's something that we're putting on foundation. Now, what we've decided in terms of strategy for the technology is designing it for sustainable and for the future as well. So we're looking at the future of mobile is progressive web app. And that means that you actually, as you do the development of the app, you actually don't need to have it on the stores, the Apple Store and Google Play and so on. It can actually be a link from your website as you're navigating your responsive mobile website, and then you could just add it to your home as a shortcut, and it's a web app, but it caches it, so a lot of the information and the data and so on is stored on your phone, and it's a lot more friendlier. The challenge right now is that not all native features are accessible with a progressive web app, right? So we're not there yet, but the way that we're going to structure the native app, which is the one that you get off the stores and so on, most of this technology is actually going to be ready for the progressive web app. So the modules that are not necessarily ready in terms of a progressive web app will be ready. We can swap it out once it's ready as well as it's developing. But we know that that's from discussions and so on. We know that that's where it's going. So where the technology is quite flexible in developing that. The other part in terms of the technology that we want to do is that it's not reliant on a specific CMS, a content management system. We're developing our content management system with WordPress. So you can actually put in all your Explorer content and so on, all your settings through WordPress. And then what it does is that it relies on a data file called JSON. And the JSON is what will actually pull in. The app uses the JSON file. It doesn't ever touch the CMS. So you can have Drupal, you can have any type of CMS that could spill out basically the JSON structure that you need for the app itself. So that's the structure that we're doing it. So it's not reliant on that CMS, and it's available for other organizations if they want to. So we're actually excited to actually open it up. There will be a museumguide.org open source project that we're going to facilitate, and we're looking for museums. So right now we're looking at some of the other national museums in Canada to jump on this to help us through the development of this framework that we're doing and the growth of it. And that was me. That was it. Wow. There you go. Good job.
Awesome. Is this thing on? It is.
It is.
All right, so I think there was a lot to digest and talk about in both of your talks. We have a bit of questions that we have sort of just in working through both of our presentations. We, you know, a lot of questions came up, and we had some good discussion back and forth while we were planning things. And one of the things was the concept of minimal viable content and storytelling. And I think a lot of the stuff that we talked about, you know, it takes a lot of content. It's content heavy, and that takes time to develop. And you know, you always have the discussion with your curatorial colleagues about, you know, how much more work is this gonna be for me? And so I think what we're talking about is it doesn't always need to be that content already exists somewhere. So we're talking about what can be repackaged. What do we already have existing that can be repackaged? So I'm wondering, for those of you that are working through your strategies, are you having these discussions with your colleagues already? And you know, I'm going to walk around with the mic, so if anyone wants to just give us a little, you know, sort of window into where you're at with your mobile, that would be great.
But also, I think we can just open up to questions as well. I don't think we need to be stuck on,
Okay.
on these as well, I think.
Okay.
Right?
Do you want me to put them all up?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
So the other thing we talked about is sort of who owns the digital layer. You know, there's a lot of copyright issues involved with content in all of our museums. You know, is it something that the digital teams own and work with internal stakeholders to ensure that the content has proper rights and things like that? Interoperability came up as well. You know, how do we plan for 5 years out for mobile? Are we looking ahead to the next generation? Is everyone looking at progressive web apps?
Yeah, even on that point, one of the things that changes the landscape and kind of points to the importance of that is, like, just a couple weeks ago, some people downloading a new version of iOS saw that there was some sort of library available that pointed to Apple's movement forward into the smart glasses. And so thinking that that is going to be one of the next, you know, interfaces at play, how do you start, like, you guys, it sounds like you're on a very long-term project. You're building for sustainability, so those types of questions need to be a part of the conversation. How do we keep it evergreen? How do we keep it growing?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it is a 12-month project overall, but we are looking at, again, that minimal package. So the product that we're launching it slowly. It will not have all the features that I spoke of, but slowly, every 3 months or so, we're looking at adding, you know, those features and so on. So, and then again, still thinking about the technology in the future. We're actually fortunate, being one of the large national museums. Our team, we have full developers on board. So that's one of the last questions, for example. We do have the internal capacity. We've actually worked with QZIM in the early days of QZIM on their palette and so on. So we played around with a whole bunch of different solutions and so on as well. So we're fortunate we had that. And I think we want to give back by this museumguide.org, the work that we're doing as well. And it makes another choice, of course, of taking a look at. But, yeah.
Awesome. Does anyone have? Yes. Yeah, we have to use the mic because we're recording the sessions and we're going to podcast them after, so.
Thanks, and thanks for coming. Great presentation. I'm Mark. I'm from the Low Art Museum, University of Miami. I'm also an MCN board member. I just wanted to address the first question briefly, is that I think that I get it for, we have limited resources, but I think it's dangerous, the idea of just to repackage what already exists. So the museum field is really going through this issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the existing voices and research primarily are not always representative of the diverse communities that we're serving. So, you know, repackaging this existing information, the minimal non-inclusive voices that we have, can be problematic. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and kind of in thinking through some of the topics for discussion, the notion of minimum viable content wasn't exclusively tied to a repackaging notion. It was more about kind of, you know, we talk about these concepts of being agile and having a minimum viable product, kind of what's the least, you know, number of features or tours or whatever it might be that can be put out into the open to get a you know, tighter and smaller feedback loop to know that we're heading in the right direction with the right inputs. I think, you know, even on the topic of minimum viable content, I want to loop it back to the question you asked yesterday about the machine translation. In my mind, like, those two, you know, ideas can be pulled together, and like, what is the least amount of translating effort, whether it be machine or otherwise, that we can put forward to know that our non-native English speakers have the ability to access content. So just an idea of like, what are the, I don't want to call them shortcuts because I think that's a dangerous term to use, but what are like, how can I get 90% of the benefit for 10% of the effort, you know, by just being, you know, thoughtful in advance about what I can put out quickly.
So, Glenn Barnes from OnSale. So we're a mobile app vendor, like Brendan. So I'm interested, like, you know, you've made this decision to build yourself. We know how much it costs to build a platform over the long term. It's going to be hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. Is that a good use of the taxpayers' money? And how did we make the decision not to work with a vendor to build on their kind of platforms for a far more affordable price?
So that was the question I was waiting for.
Yeah.
So I come from actually a digital agency background. I've had 20 years of running a digital agency for museums and public sector organizations and so on. And the team that we have, and vendors, we'll be using vendors definitely in terms of the development of scope as we're moving forward. Digital agency vendors, not necessarily a product vendor. But the crafting of what we're trying to develop, it is competitive in competing with the vendors that like you guys in terms of developing this platform. It won't cost hundreds of millions of dollars in doing this. We've got a really good skilled team internally. We develop our own wayfinding info kiosk, for example, and platforms and websites and so on. So we know the whole cycle of product development. So it is something that we've played around for the last couple of years, for not only for mobile but for other applications. So the technology stacks that we're using and stuff is quite comfortable. The technology to develop applications today using JavaScript libraries and so on is a lot easier and a lot faster, right? And the whole stack that we've selected. So it was an approach for us. Again, it's we love vendors, we love products, we use products, of course, for special cases, but this is a milestone product. It's one of those main, it's like a website where it's a main tool for our visitors, so we call it one of our main touch points for the visitor. So we feel that it's more confident to use it as an ongoing operational tool, and not to have, and to have the internal capacity to maintain it. And that's just, and again, it's probably one of, you know, out of 100 organizations that we can do this. We definitely do not recommend this for most organizations, but this is the approach that we're taking, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's definitely valuable to use taxpayer money for this type of project. I think one of the things that's important, and I think we need to understand, is that digital layer is there, and it needs to be an essential service, just like visitor services, just like the website is an essential service. Everybody has a phone in their pocket these days, or, you know, a large majority. So, you know, producing something to engage with those visitors, I think is really important. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong. Hi, I'm Linda. I'm from Sydney, and I used to work, I was head of digital at the Australian Museum for a long time and digital learning at the Maritime Museum. Yeah, I've done a lot of work on talking to visitors about mobile apps, digital, blah, 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 blah. And I was just saying to Ryan on Twitter that a lot of people I spoke to, it's a hard conversation because a lot of them don't want to use their devices when they're at a museum. And I interviewed one couple, a mum and dad, and they almost got divorced over this because the mother was like, well, I want to have a screen-free experience when I'm at a museum. So I think it's a really tough one. And I also think often people say, well, visitors don't know what they want, but there's a lot of practical things that they say, and I call them the worried visitor. It's like, well, how do I download it? Is there Wi-Fi there? Am I just going to have this thing on my device? And we know from research in Australia that Australians keep mobile apps on their devices for 2 weeks and then they just don't look at them again. And also for us at the Maritime Museum, the big issue was, will my device fall in the water? And that was a huge concern for them because a lot of mobile phones do, because we're right on Sydney Harbour.
Yeah.
So, yeah, anyway. So I think it's a really interesting product, and I do think that there are a layer of visitors that really want to engage with that, but also when I've done work excuse me, on wayfinding, a lot of people say, I'm just happy to wander around. That's what a museum is. So I just think you've got to kind of sell it to the people that will use it and use it for what it's worth.
I think at the end of the day, it's simply about options. Not everyone's going to use any single thing in the same way. Not everyone's going to even want to use a printed guide or look at a map. So, some organizations have as few as like 3 visitor personas. Some have as many as 20, somewhere in between. It's kind of finding where you're going to hit some of your goals and accommodate the needs as many as you can. But it's a complex, it's absolutely a complex problem, like you point out.
See,
You've got to deal with that concern.
that's right. So what
Sorry.
our
Deal with
framework, what you see is that the personalization, for example, of you're planning your visit, those functionalities are actually what we're using for the website and our on-site info kiosk. So that engineering that's being done there is also just going to be adapted for the mobile. So one of the major strategy is really to try to enhance the visitor experience once they're there. How easy they can actually get to what they want to explore and have a wow factor. And again, the progressive web app and the technology is very important because, again, yes, they do not want to install a mobile app for the museum for that one day and then delete it. And the idea is that they can browse the mobile website and then most of the same functionality will be there. And then for the enhanced exploratory type of little bonuses, they can just, with one button on while they're browsing the website, because they're on the website trying to figure out what's going on, they can just add it to the homepage and have that augmented experience. So we hear you. It's part of our research as well, and it's just getting that the goal of what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Joey from the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and I'm very interested and intrigued and refreshed by the progressive web application, particularly because I'm in digital collections, so I'm thinking about the long-term retention of things like this. And I understand that it's still working towards having all of the features of the native applications, but I'm curious if this community is also thinking about creating tools for migrating native applications to the progressive web applications, and what possibility there is for kind of being able to retain the dead apps that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, in most cases, regardless of what the CMS is, there's some sort of standardized data output feeding content into the app. So, by way of a JSON feed or API, just like you guys have, just like we have. So the ability to have that existing data, data source in the back, whatever the back end is, feed a progressive web app is a piece of cake.
Yeah,
it's not
so
really a big technical challenge.
That's right. So exporting, for example, the data of a native app into the JSON file format, right? That requires for this tool, for example, is that easy. That's what. Yeah.
probably 95% of the way there. About 5% manual cleanup that we had to do where we couldn't match stuff, but yeah, a bit of programming time and it can be done.
Laura has a question.
Hi, I'm Laura Mann. I work with Frankly Green and Webb. We're a research and strategy firm. And like Linda, I've done a lot of research into mobile use in museums as well. And I'm especially interested in the personalization features that you described. And two of them in particular, the audience group information and the interest categories. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about those. Who are the audience groups and how did you come up with them?
Yeah.
What are the interest categories? And do you have any data on how those are used?
So the in progress in the strategy that was there. But I can talk to, we like the Falk visitor experience model. So it is an internal debate. We established a working group within our museum quite recently, in the last couple of months, to start looking at the overall strategy and approaches and to define what you just spoke about.
Yeah, so part of our internal structure, Marquis launched a digital steering committee that includes people at the director level, his colleagues, and then from that there are various digital working groups. One of them is the Digital Touchpoints Working Group. We've had 3 meetings, and we do have, you saw an old visitor journey map. We do have personas from a few years ago and that journey map, but that's going to be one of the first things that we're going to do in that group is update that information.
I'd be curious to have access to your research too.
We'll talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, my name is Mila. I just have a question, actually, picking up on what Laura said over there. Is, do you guys actually, what are you doing when people are answering those questions? Are you going to be using that data in any way to inform your decision making? And or what are the privacy considerations about that? I guess it's an opt-in, but.
You mean answering questions? Sorry.
Like when they're entering their profile.
So your privacy information.
Well, privacy, I mean, I guess it's sort of opt-in, so maybe it's less hairy, but
Yeah.
mostly I'm just wondering about how you might use the data that you're collecting about your visitors.
Yeah, so definitely being in Canada, we have very strict privacy policies. We do privacy impact assessments for every product that we launch. So that information at this point from the strategy is we don't retain it. It's just stored locally. There is nothing that is retained at this point. Yeah.
So is the experience kind of like, although it's retained locally rather than into a profile on the cloud, like it's similar to the Spotify onboarding, select a couple preferences and then bada bing, bada boom?
Yeah, and it's just to create the filter, that's it. So there's there's nothing retained. Yeah. That's the current situation. Yeah.
Would you guys be interested in maybe moving towards a situation where you would be actually making use of that data? Because that could be quite rich data that you can use in strategic ways.
Agreed, but there's a lot of work and justification for doing that. So but yes, I mean, if it's something, it's you've got the list of priorities of certain things to launch a product like this. So what we did is we again risk mitigated in saying no, we're not doing that right now. So for the purpose of launching the product, but yes, baby steps. That's it. Yeah.
Nothing's ever done, right? Nothing's ever done.
So I have a question for the audience. So those of you who have invested effort in 3D scanning, was ever a part of that around your mobile strategy moving forward, specific to augmented reality and remote access and some of the things that you pointed out of being able to gesture the object? Or is it solely
Or available on the web.
just for collections data?
We have about 5 minutes, so.
Yeah.
Hi, sure. So I'm with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and we did a project years ago called Virtual Williamsburg, and we're sort of operating on a different scale. Rather than skulls and canoes, we're talking about scanning buildings in an entire town. And so we did that work years ago. Yeah, and then unfortunately, inevitably, things aren't necessarily, I think maybe a better word for repackageable is reusable. So we've starting some of that those things over again using more advanced technologies such as LiDAR and things like that. So yeah, so it was originally intended for a different purpose, but now as we rethink about it, and you know, one of the sort of constant themes here is we just got our feet in the game years ago, and now we know a little bit more about it, and we have some experience with what went well and what didn't. We're able to repeat that now for a different platform such as AR, and that's kind of what we're looking at going forward.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to share. We scanned a series of objects in our antiquities collection, and we're sort of debating how we wanted to make that accessible. We actually have decided for now to pilot an in-gallery digital interactive. We need to get a larger screen. That decision was made to, we feel like, to make the gallery a bit more dynamic, but we were also thinking about social interaction, of how people would interact with a digital interactive as opposed to being on their own mobile device. In all likelihood, you would be able to access this from an online platform as well. But right now, we're leaning towards enhancing the in-gallery experience with our 3D scans.
I just wanted to mention about the secondary uses of personally identifiable information. We have to be careful how we leverage information that we collect for secondary purposes. You want to ensure you obtain consent because it can, from a policy perspective, not just a legal perspective, you can upset your visitors when they learn that you've collected information for one purpose and then you now use that information in another way without having informed them at the time you collected that data.
Thank you. Maybe this is the last question.
So one of the technical underpinnings for a lot of the advanced features that you're doing in these apps is either location awareness or indoor positioning. Can you guys talk about what kind of approaches you're taking to that problem?
So definitely we're testing out. Right now we have a full, like an Aruba, I'm not sure if anybody, so the Aruba infrastructure that works well with so positioning with their beacon as well. So there's a mix of technology. We're still in the testing phase of seeing what the infrastructure would be properly to do the positioning, but it would be more of a mix of that Wi-Fi and beacon.
Yeah, I've seen a tremendous amount of progress with regards to on-device machine vision to produce some of the wayfinding kind of benefits like I displayed towards the end of the presentation. I mean, it's one of those super slippery slopes, indoor positioning. I know it's been regarded as one of the holy grails, and just, you know, over the years that I've been involved in the museum sector, like the amount of attention placed on it, because it is a truly big problem that needs to be solved, but the amount of money that's been thrown at infrastructure to solve it, to only get you like half the way there, has been baffling. So to be able to get like almost like centimeter accurate indoor positioning, which is coming, is going to be one part, you know, nerd term sensor fusion, kind of mixing what you know from some of the, you know, access points or beacons and what you know from the device kind of all together. But the thing that I showed, and I didn't really go too much into detail, was that little AR overview of indoor navigation did not rely on Wi-Fi, did not rely on beacons, did not rely on GPS. It was solely based on the phone's ability to know what it was looking at, the location of that, and then the relative locations of the kind of pivot points in the journey. So I think in the future, that's going to be the way things go, because there, again, is going to be this kind of digital carbon copy, indoor, outdoor, that you're able to kind of program within or work within, versus needing to go, oh my God, we need to install this thing in our access point. Oh my God, there's a new one that installs in our track lighting. Do we do that? Like, you're hearing all of these things right now because those are new kind of shifts in, you know, all of the sensors, whether it be Bluetooth or Zigbee or ultra-wideband, all of these different frequencies. It's all very, you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of noise in all of that.
There is,
I do think there's a lot heading in the direction of it being vision-based versus radio frequency-based.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.